Dear friends, welcome to another episode of Neo-War today. In this video, we will discuss Machiavelli's teachings on the use of mercenaries, important teachings that Vladimir Putin ignored and is now facing the consequences. In the past, during the 15th and 16th centuries, the use of mercenaries in Europe was a common and widespread practice. Many rulers saw great advantages in employing these fighters, with the main one being the speed at which they could be mobilized, as well as the quality and efficiency of the units. At that time, the concept of a professional army did not exist, and the armed forces were composed of peasants who were mobilized and demobilized as threats arose and disappeared. This meant that mobilizing armies of tens and thousands of men was a slow and difficult process, resulting in an army composed, for the most part, of peasants with little or no military experience, who were thrust into combat after very short periods of training. Furthermore, withdrawing peasants from the fields affected the entirely agricultural economy of the European kingdoms of that era. An alternative was to hire mercenaries, groups formed by fighters, some with 20 or more years of military experience, who could be immediately mobilized without affecting the kingdom's economy. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the Swiss were known to be the best and bravest mercenaries in Europe, and it was precisely this reputation that secured them a contract to protect the Pope and the territories of the Vatican, a contract that extends to this day. In the 16th century, the Landsknechts emerged, Germans known for their colorful and flamboyant uniforms, and with a fearsome reputation for violence, brutality, and a complete absence of morals. However, they were so efficient in combat that practically all the major European kingdoms of the time hired them, and often German units and mercenaries who were allies until the previous contract found themselves facing each other on opposite sides of the battlefield. It was precisely during that time that a man named Niccolo Machiavelli wrote a political treatise that became an authentic guide for rulers. The title of the work is The Prince, written in 1513 but published only in 1532, 5 years after his death. Despite being relatively short, it is a dense book, filled with practical teachings that a ruler must follow to be successful in their reign. Among the various teachings, Machiavelli devoted special attention to mercenaries, who, as I mentioned earlier, were a widely employed profession throughout Europe at that time. Despite all the practical advantages I mentioned, Machiavelli warned that mercenaries were hired fighters who did not fight for a cause, but solely for money. Their loyalty was given to the ruler with the most wealth. According to Machiavelli, mercenaries are undisciplined, cowardly, and disloyal, motivated solely by greed. Therefore, they pose a serious risk to any ruler since they can, at any moment, receive better offers from the adversary. Despite this warning, the use of mercenaries continued to be a common practice in the following century, not only in Europe, but also in America, with the United States hiring various regiments and German mercenaries to fight against the British Empire in the American Revolution between 1775 and 1783. Mercenaries were also used in South America, with British legions being contracted by Simon Bolivar. The wars of independence of the Spanish colonies in South America coincided with the end of the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, and as a result, thousands of European fighters were suddenly left unemployed, many of whom were hired as mercenaries in the South American Wars of Independence. In the late 19th century, and especially in the 20th century, with the advent of large professional armies and a more standardized recruitment and training process, the use of large mercenary units declined significantly, only to resurface during the Cold War in a completely different form, now known by the acronym PMC, which stands for Private Military Company. The first major PMC emerged in the 1960s, formed by veterans of the SAS, the Special Forces of the British Army, who operated mainly on the African continent. With the end of the Cold War, millions of military personnel from the former Soviet republics were left unemployed, contributing to a rapid growth in the number of PMCs, with the United States also joining in. The wars fought in the Middle East since the 1990s opened up a highly lucrative market for these companies. In fact, it was during that decade that Blackwater, a PMC founded by former members of the CIA and the US Navy, emerged, now known as Constellus. However, Despite a large number of PMCs in the United States, these groups were always limited to private security, typically responsible for ensuring the protection of facilities and individuals, such as local executives and politicians. In fact, there is no official or unofficial record of the United States or other allied and member countries employing PMCs in large-scale combat contexts. The first truly evident case of employing mercenaries in a large-scale combat context in the 21st century came from Russia. Since the year 2000, when Vladimir Putin assumed political control of Russia, it is estimated that over 24 PMCs have been created in that country. The most well-known of these is the Wagner Group, established in 2014 at Putin's request to train Ukrainian and Russian separatists in the war he had initiated in Donetsk. In 2015, the Wagner Group expanded into the Middle East, primarily in Syria, taking advantage of Russia's involvement in the civil war in that country. They then expanded into the African continent, in countries such as Mali and the Central African Republic, playing an important role in the expansion and consolidation of Russian influence in that region. In 2022, when Putin invaded Ukraine for the second time, Wagner Group mercenaries were once again called upon for combat, assuming effective responsibility in the Donetsk region and advancing against strategic targets, such as the city of Dnipro. For 10 months, the city of Dnipro was heavily attacked, resulting in its complete devastation, with Wagner Group mercenaries capturing the ruins on May 20th, 2023. During the time these mercenaries were operating in Russia, Prigozhin made harsh criticisms against the Russian High Military Command, accusing General Shoigu and General Gerasimov, respectively the Minister of Defense and the Chief of the Russian General Staff, of sabotaging his group. The situation reached a point of total rupture on June 23rd, when Prigozhin accused Shoigu of ordering an attack on one of his bases, subsequently invading the Rostov Oblast, capturing the regional capital, and occupying the headquarters of the important southern military district. In his advance towards Moscow, Prigozhin shot down 6 Russian planes, killing about 30 pilots and crew members. Prigozhin made it clear that the objective of his armed rebellion was not to overthrow Putin, but rather to try to force Putin to change the top echelons of the Russian armed forces. In this way, his actions, literally under the coercion of firearms, are seen as an attempt to weaken central power, paving the way for a future seizure of power. The uprising of Prigozhin's mercenaries, rebelling and violently meddling in state affairs, reminiscent of the mercenary uprisings in Machiavelli's time, uprisings that led him to write his important work, a work that Vladimir Putin obviously ignored by placing so much power in the hands of a mercenary.